we talked to you last year. We talked about, the things that you deal with as a dentist. Where are we at with dentistry? What are you observing? Are we getting better? Are people learning this stuff? Are we worse? Is it about the same? Like, what are you observing?
The state of dentistry, like the profession as a whole.
Yeah, like the things that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
I think the state of dentistry as a whole is very similar to just modern medicine in general. Like, it is a slow moving machine, and there's a lot of, I will say, conflicts of interest, kind of like medicine, where, look, people, dentists, doctors, whatever, we're making money off people not being healthy. Like, dentist, if you're not going to have any cavities, you're not going to need fillings, you're not going to need root canals, you're not going to need bridges and dentures, like dentistry would, cease to exist, right? So I'm not saying, I think most dentists mean well, and they don't need to, like, our diet is so bad in the modern world that being a dentist is the most secure job in the world.
You're good.
So it's like, they don't need to try and like sell you on treatment. Like, there's plenty of need for dentists. But the state of, the state of dentistry in general is, and I talk about, I always take, as dentists, we have to take 50 hours of continuing education every year, or every 2 years. And so the continuing education I always take is on, if they ever have a nutrition course, I'm in it. Like, I'm taking every CE course on oral health and nutrition. And over the last few years, they're all the same, meaning they're the same in that they say, hey, we know what causes cavities. It's carbohydrates. Bacteria in your mouth ferment carbohydrates into acid, and they cause cavities. And so, like, we know that. We know, like, that is what causes cavities. Now, there's other things like that will make it worse, like mouth breathing, dry mouth. So if you're taking drugs, or you have like chemotherapy or something like that, it's going to give you really dry mouth. It's going to severely predispose you to cavities. Fundamentally, though, cavities are caused by bacteria in the mouth fermenting carbohydrates into acid. Like, that's it. And yet, so you would think that because of this, and by the way, which I think is helpful, cavities are the most common disease in the world. Like, more so, it is the most common non-communicable disease in the world. Up to 90% of people have dental cavities. And so you would think, we know the cause, carbohydrates. It is the most prevalent disease in the world. You would think, like, we would be saying, hey, we need to cut back on carbohydrates, right? Or at the very least, like, we need to be cutting back on sugar and refined, grains. And maybe dentists will go that far. But even in these CE courses where they talk about nutritional counseling, they might recommend, like, hey, tell your patients to reduce sugar, but they're still recommending, they are not recommending a low carb diet yet, which, to me, if you're a dentist, like, you should be recommending a low carb diet. Like, that, the evidence supports that. So that's the state of dentistry. Like, that's where I think, that's where my head goes.
This is exactly why, when people say, like, doctors and dentists and medical professionals need more training in nutrition, they don't get enough, they need to get more. Everybody in the low carb world seems to be on board with that. I'm not on board with that, because they would just get more indoctrinated in the wrong information. It reminds me of a podcast I listened to on the daily. I've talked about this a few times. It was released in January, and it was all about childhood obesity. And they called so many things right. We didn't have childhood obesity in the 60s. It became a problem in the 70s and 80s. We went to school districts. We told one school district to exercise and eat more fruits and vegetables. The other school district, we did nothing. Everything we told this school district, the first one, was like what we thought was going to improve health. They were both the same. So by that conclusion, obesity is genetic. And now you need counseling at age 2 if you're expressing symptoms of obesity. You get Ozempic at age 12, and you get bariatric surgery at 13. Really?
Man, that's actually a great point. Like, because it's a double-sided problem. We do need all these healthcare professionals to be educated in nutrition, and obesity plays a role in almost every single healthcare, like, no matter where you're practicing in healthcare, like, obesity is a thing, is a concern. Like, I talk about in the presentation, like, how dentists need to be concerned about obesity, because we can see it directly in the mouth, and it has dire consequences of airway obstruction. Like, so if we're not concerned about obesity, I don't think we're doing our job. But like you said, if we go to get continuing education, I would argue, not teaching the right thing.
A
So, like,
equals B, B equals G. What? Like,
yeah, exactly. So, how to solve that problem, like, that's a tough problem, because
Yeah.
because science doesn't work by consensus. So you don't want to say, oh, now this is consensusly, like, this is the consensus healthy diet. We don't want to get there, but right now I feel like it seems
Yeah.
like no one has any idea.
Yeah. It's so bad. It's so bad. And you said something interesting as well, and I've always heard this. That like the dentist is really seeing the front edge of poor health. So you are an advocate of at least the dentist recommending a low carbohydrate diet. They can talk about diet and recommend that people change and eat more proteins and fats versus the carbohydrates. That I'm on board with that. That sounds great.
Yeah, I feel like the issue is a lot of dentists feel like it's not their role. Like, it's strange because we are basically required to do nutritional counseling, but at the same time, I feel like most dentists would say, if I'm recommending low carb, I'm out of my lane, so to speak. And so I'm like, it's kind of a direct conflict, because like I'm thinking, look, cavities, most common disease in the world, caused by carbohydrates. We're required to do nutritional counseling. A plus B plus C equals low carb diet. Like, it's not that complicated, but yeah, I think there's I think it's a long road ahead for just healthcare in general.
Yeah.
Because I don't see any kind of consensus in the right way, like anything besides like what you just said. Like, that's where it seems like everything's moving.
Yeah.
Like, is there a pill or a shot for this? Because we can't do anything about it.
Totally. And the food is so delicious. I don't want to stop eating it anyway.
Exactly,
Like,
exactly.
yeah. It's crazy. Okay, so cavities, you called it a disease, and for me in my childhood, it was so prevalent. I always had one. To think of it as a disease is a little bit interesting to think that way.
Dude, thank you for saying that, because in the presentation, I don't know if it got across, but I was like, because we've normalized cavities, like, it seems like you call it a disease, it takes someone, they're like, what? But
Whoa.
it is so normalized. It's such a normalized disease that we think it's normal to have cavities, and it's like not a problem. It's not a sign that something is wrong. Like, but when your child has cavities, you should be thinking like, whoa, what is wrong? Like, this is not normal, but cavities are normal. So, and I actually think that is one of the ways to, because all parents, I hesitant to say all, but almost all parents, they really care for their children. And so if a parent did know, like, hey, a cavity is a sign that too much of a bad food and or malnutrition, like, most parents are going to be concerned, like, how do we fix this? And that is a gateway to a better diet.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so again, observation, but would you say that changing the diet does more for dental health than, say, the standard practice kind of dental hygiene things that we're told, like brushing, flossing? Obviously, like all of it has its place. Where do you kind of rate the importance of those things?
That's a good question. And I liken it unto, let's say you have a bad diet, and but you hit the gym for an hour every day, hardcore. You are doing cardio, like you are busting it, activity, you're in the sun, you're sleeping, but your diet is terrible. Well, you can get away with that for probably a long time, at least through your youth, right? So I liken oral hygiene to that, where it's like, hey, if you don't have a good diet, you can prevent cavities and downsides by brushing twice a day, using paste and chemicals, and, doing all the traditional oral health care stuff, floss and all the stuff, right? That can help mitigate a bad situation. But if you're doing everything right on the diet side, all this other stuff is a lot of times superfluous, cosmetic even. So I of course think diet is primarily important, because I actually think these problems, we don't want to just mask them. So for example, I think fluoride's a good example. Let's say fluoride was effective, and I wrote a long article on this, mildly effective maybe. But one of the concerns early on in fluoride research was, hey, cavities are a sign of a vitamin or mineral deficiency. It's a sign of malnutrition. We don't want to mask that up with some fluoride chemical, because back then, and this is in the early 20s or in the mid 20th century, it was, it was known like, hey, the mouth is the canary in the coal mine. Like, if we're getting cavities, this is other stuff could be going wrong like that, right? So if we're just masking this with chemicals or paste and fluorides and whatever, you could be masking an underlying problem, and we don't want to do that. So long answer to your question, but I think diet is primarily important. And
primarily.
depending on how much that diet is off, depends on how important this oral hygiene strategy needs to be.